Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a highly unusual, incredibly high-stakes summit in Beijing between the United States and China. This was a meeting that genuinely left the international community buzzing, because what unfolded wasn't just your standard run-of-the-mill political handshake. No, it felt a lot more like a masterclass in psychological maneuvering, layered with ancient historical warnings and some very serious economic consequences. So let's look closely at what actually happened behind those closed doors. Okay, let's dive right into this. Right off the bat, we get this quote: "China is a beautiful country." Coming from Donald Trump, a leader we all know for his highly unconventional, completely unfiltered public rhetoric, this remarkably deferential, soft-spoken tone is a really bizarre contrast. I mean, it immediately signaled to everyone watching that the usual diplomatic playbook had basically been thrown right out the window. To figure out what was really going on, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll cover the Beijing visit itself, then move into that shift in persona we just touched on. Next, we'll examine the paranoia and power plays at work, dive into the historical theory of the Thucydides Trap, and finally, we'll address the Taiwan flashpoint. Section 1. The Beijing visit, setting the stage for a superpower clash. The sheer geopolitical weight of this event honestly cannot be overstated. The United States arrived in Beijing with a massive corporate entourage. We're talking top-tier business leaders like Elon Musk and executives from Boeing. But notice the inherent contradiction here. Publicly, in places like G7 summits, the U.S. consistently frames China as a serious strategic threat. Yet the reality of this visit involved sending a heavy delegation of CEOs right into Beijing to do business. It perfectly captures the totally unavoidable interdependence of these two massive economies. Moving on to Section 2, a shift in persona, walking on eggshells in Beijing. As the meetings got underway, the behavioral anomalies just became impossible to ignore. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the contrast with the U.S. president's usual history of blunt, abrasive rhetoric toward allied leaders like Justin Trudeau or Emmanuel Macron. Yet, his demeanor in Beijing, it was highly subdued. He was careful. When pressed by reporters on sensitive topics, he actively avoided using any harsh diplomatic language whatsoever. And, despite those friendly optics, their personal origins literally couldn't be more fundamentally different. On one side, you have a leader born into inherited wealth, managing a massive business empire. On the other side, Chinese President Xi Jinping, whose youth involved severe hardship, literally spending time living in caves and relying on leaves for survival. They come from entirely different universes. And as we're about to see, those polite diplomatic smiles were masking a profound lack of trust. Section 3. Paranoia and power plays, the hidden distrust behind the handshakes. Because right beneath those carefully curated handshakes, an intense atmosphere of suspicion was completely dictating the visit. Just look at the strict security protocols enforced on the American delegation. No regular mobile phones allowed, no laptops permitted. Do not use local USB ports. Never plug into local wall sockets. Only use approved power banks. This rapid-fire list illustrates just a staggering level of paranoia. It was an absolute zero-trust policy when it came to cyber espionage. Get this, it actually went so far that all diplomatic gifts and souvenirs given to the American delegation were completely left behind. They literally flew out without them due to fears of juice-jacking and hidden malware. Think about that for a second. The fear of digital theft was so intense that it completely overrode the centuries-old diplomatic protocol of exchanging gifts. And the psychological power plays? They weren't just digital. During a tour of the restricted zone on High Garden, the U.S. side essentially asked for confirmation of their special status, sort of wondering if other foreign leaders ever get to see this exclusive area. The response was a masterstroke of subtle maneuvering. The Chinese leadership just smiled and casually noted that Russian President Vladimir Putin actually visits quite frequently. Ouch. In one breath, they completely neutralized the American attempt at feeling exclusive and subtly reminded them of China's very strong alternative alliances. And this brilliantly illustrates how that underlying diplomatic tension manifested into very real economic consequences. Before the summit, the expectation was that China would purchase roughly 500 Boeing aircraft. However, coming out of this highly complex visit, the actual deal announced was slashed down to just 200 planes. And the immediate market reaction to that? A 4% drop. That single number represents the plunge in Boeing's stock right after the reduced deal was announced. It is stark, undeniable proof of the immense economic leverage at play here. It shows us how diplomatic friction instantly translates into billions of dollars lost or gained on the global market. Section 4. The Thucydides Trap. Echoes of Ancient History. During the summit, the Chinese president didn't just stick to talking about trade. He actually invoked echoes of ancient history, using this specific phrasing. The current century-long transformation is accelerating. Right now, there are changes the likes of which we haven't seen in 100 years. If you decode that diplomatic speak, it's essentially a confident assertion and perhaps even a veiled threat, acknowledging that the era of uncontested American global dominance is setting. So the crucial point we need to unpack is this concept Xi directly referenced, the Thucydides Trap. It's a term based on the writings of the ancient Greek historian Thucydides, describing the incredibly high risk of war that occurs when a rapidly emerging power threatens to displace an existing, ruling superpower. Basically, the insecurity caused by a rising power often leads straight into a massive conflict. Looking at the history, you can see exactly what Beijing was referencing here. Originally, it was the ruling power Sparta, feeling threatened by the rising power of Athens, which resulted in the devastating 40-year Peloponnesian War. Fast forward to the modern era. Great Britain was the ruling power feeling threatened by an industrializing Germany, and the result of that dynamic was the catastrophic outbreak of World War I. In fact, according to research conducted by Harvard University, over the last 500 years, there have been 16 distinct times when a rising power actively challenged a ruling power. Out of those 16 instances, 12 of them ended in a catastrophic war. 12 out of 16. That is the very heavy historical weight behind the words spoken in Beijing. Section 5. The Taiwan Flashpoint, the ultimate red line. And this is exactly where the theoretical danger of the Thucydides Trap crashes right into modern reality. According to sources, this private, totally stark warning was delivered regarding Taiwan. Mishandling this issue could lead to direct armed conflict and push relations into an extremely dangerous situation. There was absolutely no ambiguity here. Beijing drew an undeniable line in the sand, marking Taiwan as the single most volatile issue capable of triggering that historical trap. Let's see how this builds into the broader American reaction. Aboard Air Force One, on the journey home, when pressed by reporters, the U.S. president actively avoided giving firm answers on Taiwan, expressing a distinct disinterest in committing to a distant war thousands of miles away. Confronted with a glaring red line, the immediate reaction was deflection and a very clear step back from any sort of firm military commitment. Which leaves us looking at the broader picture of this truly extraordinary diplomatic encounter. We saw the polite smiles, the massive business delegations, and the subdued rhetoric, sure. But right beneath it all lies a foundation of intense cybersecurity paranoia, slashed economic deals, and stark warnings of armed conflict. It really forces us to ask, will the ruling and rising powers of our era actually find a way to escape the Thucydides trap, or is a historic collision completely inevitable? It's a fragile reality we are all living in, and definitely one that demands our close, focused attention. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.